Happy Father's Day to me. You know, Mother's Day, people say, hey, Mom, what do you want for Mother's Day? And she says, I'd love to go to church with my family. Hey, Dad, what do you want for Father's Day? I want to sleep in. Leave me home. Well, I had to be here, and I'm a father, so drink 'em up, boys. You know, Father's Day, and this is a special Father's Day for me because this is the first Father's Day when I'm a father-in-law. This is my first father-in-law Father's Day. Jeremy, here's to you, buddy. And but Father's Day really, it occurs to me, it's a celebration of something important. It's not really a celebration of fathers. I think it's a celebration of purpose. I think what becomes clear if you become a father is that now there is a responsibility, there is an opportunity, there's something greater in your life than just you. And so I think that's what we're celebrating. I think we're celebrating our dads, but I know we have, we all have different stories. We have good and bad experiences with our fathers. We have positive and negative impressions from our fathers, but I think we understand. I think we all understand that we were made for more. That our life has to be about something more than just accumulating and acquiring and achieving. There has to be a higher purpose. And I believe we all have them. I think fatherhood for me gave me a clear definition of my life is about something more than me, and I want my life to matter in other people's lives. But I think that's in all of us. I think all of us have this appetite, have this longing for something more. Doesn't matter whether we're fathers or mothers or men or women or young or old. Doesn't matter whether you're 8 or you're 80. We all want to matter. We all want our lives to be significant. And we live in a culture of bullies, and there are these bullies that tell us that our significance is only fashioned because of what we accumulate or what we achieve. And they bully us into believing that we're only as important as the trophies we acquire. And I want to push back on that today. I think part of our celebration, we want to celebrate our higher purpose. It was in 1899, there was a Yale-educated economics professor. His name was Dr. Thorstein Veblen. And he wrote a book, this was in 1899, he wrote a book called The Theory of the Leisure Class. It became a standard in the new school of economics. And what Veblen was arguing for was, he says that all societies begin to stratify themselves into the haves and the have-nots. Doesn't matter whether you're a large civilized society or a tribal culture, there are the executive class or the leader class or what he called the lords of the manor. And then there is the working class or the warrior class. There are the people that actually make things and do things that matter. And then he said there are the people that simply live off the labor of others. And in 1899, Veblen said there is this thing that happens among the working class, and it's called pecuniary emulation. I realize I have to be careful when I say pecuniary emulation on Father's Day, because some of you will think, oh, I have a pill for that, but it's not that. It's an economic term that describes how people of a lower class, people of the working class, because of their aspiration to appear beyond their station, beyond their status, will do something, and Veblen coined the term in 1899. He called it conspicuous consumption. He said this pecuniary emulation, this desire to appear to be of a higher social standing or a higher significance than your income would allow, will cause you to conspicuously consume. In other words, you will overpay for goods and services so that you can appear to be a member of the leisure class. And in 1899, Veblen predicted that the United States would become a nation with a greater divide between the haves and the have-nots, and in the middle would become what he called the middle class. And they would be characterized by conspicuous consumption, because they would be people of working class wages who sought to appear to be people of the leisure class. In 1899, Thorstein Veblen predicted our 21st century consumer-driven, brand-obsessed culture. But he also highlighted the psychological danger of this, because he knew that as people began to pursue that affirmation that came through the accumulation of wealth, or just the appearance of it, that it wouldn't satisfy them, that ultimately you would always be caught in a trap of wanting more. I think this is what bullies us in our day. I think we are constantly bullied, living in the 21st century brand-obsessed consumer culture, with the idea that our significance, our importance, our value is measured by the things we accumulate and what we achieve. And I want to push back on that today. I want to suggest that we push back on that by understanding that we are made for more, we are made for better, we are made for greater things. We are called to a higher purpose. Because the bully that is running around in our culture today is a bully that I like to call phoneliness. We are bullied by phoneliness. Phoneliness is that mindset that says, if only I had a better job, or if only I had more money, or if only I had a better opportunity, or if only I had a better life, then I would be happy, then I would be content, then I would be significant. And we're bullied by that phoneliness because we live in a brand-obsessed 21st century consumer-driven culture, and we are victims, as Veblen predicted 120 years ago, of our own conspicuous consumption. And so today I want to push back on that bully. I want to teach it a lesson of its own, that it really doesn't matter. I want to punch it in the throat and kick it while it's down. But before I get too worked up, maybe we should pray. Lord, I would ask that the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart would be pleasing in your sight, that you would use your word spoken by your servant and anointed by your Spirit to liberate us, to set us free from the bully that tells us our only significance is in what we have or what we accomplish. Pray that you would set us free today. Pray that for myself and for my family, for all of us here. For I ask that in Jesus' name. Amen. We're 13 years into the story of Joseph, the son of Jacob. We have followed him from the age of 17, when he was taken by his 10 older brothers and thrown into a pit and sold to human traffickers who took him to a foreign land of Egypt and sold him into slavery. He was 17 when this happened. The story moves forward 13 years until the age of 30, and during those 13 years, Joseph lived as a slave in the house of a man called Potiphar and as a prisoner in Pharaoh's dungeon. What were you doing from 17 to 30? What was your life like? I know what my life was like. It's 17 to 30. My life was all about a whole bunch of sort of preparation for adulthood. From 17 to 30, I graduated from high school. I graduated from college. I graduated from graduate school. I got married. I started a family. I started my professional career. And I remember during that time, during those 13 years from 17 to 30, wondering if I would ever get the chance to be the person I felt I was supposed to be the person I was called to be. I remember my impatience and my frustration, and I wasn't even in prison. I hadn't been sold into slavery. So I wonder whether Joseph wondered that. Here's a prince of Israel. Here is a young man of privilege who was sold into slavery in Egypt and then thrown into prison. And I wonder, did he ever get angry at God? Did he ever say, I deserve better. I deserve more than this. I'm frustrated with my situation, and maybe in his darkest moments thought, what did I do to deserve this? I must be worthless, and started to feel sorry for himself and discouraged and depressed. But we have no record of that. I mean, it would be reasonable if he did, wouldn't it? I mean, we would think, well, of course. I mean, you're on a bad streak, 13 years as a prisoner and a slave. That's harsh. So we could understand if you were discouraged or depressed or disappointed or angry at God, but we have no record of it. We don't know. We do know that he was very aware that God was with him. See, the definition of a higher purpose, the definition of our higher purpose is seeing God at work in you and knowing that God is with you. This is how we find our higher purpose. Where is God at work in my life? Where do I see that? And he saw it. It was all over him. When he was sold as a slave to a man named Potiphar in Egypt, the story tells us that Potiphar's whole house was blessed because of Joseph. That everything Joseph did was blessed, and Potiphar's businesses grew, and it was because Joseph was there. And not only was Joseph blessed when he was a slave in Potiphar's house, he was blessed when Potiphar's cougar wife lied about him and falsely accused him of sexual misconduct, and he was unjustly thrown into Pharaoh's dungeon. And when he was there in Pharaoh's dungeon, it says that God was with him, that God was blessing him, that God gave him favor with the guards and favor with his fellow prisoners. We know that after he was a slave and a prisoner for 11 years, the two of his cellmates had a dream and they couldn't interpret it. And when they came to Joseph and asked him if he could interpret the dream, he said, well, God can do it. His faith was still strong. After 11 years as a slave and as a prisoner, he still believed that God was with him. He was living according to his higher purpose. Therefore, it was no surprise when Pharaoh, the Pharaoh of Egypt, had these weird dreams. He had these strange dreams about the 7 fat cows and 7 ugly cows and 7 verdant stalks of grain and 7 dried out stalks of grain. When he had these, and he was explaining to his interpreters these dreams, and they couldn't interpret them, the cupbearer, who had been in prison 2 years before with Joseph, said, oh, I know about this Hebrew slave. He interpreted our dreams and did it perfectly. And so they clean up Joseph and they get him out of prison, and he goes to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh tells him the dreams about the 7 the fat cows and the 7 ugly cows, and tells him about the dream about the 7 stalks of grain and the 7 stalks of grain that consumed him. And Joseph knew exactly what it was. He said, God will tell you what this means. God is doing something among you. And he interpreted it and he broke it down and he said, here's what you need to do. And he was wise and he was skillful. And he wound up being elevated to the position of second only to Pharaoh in Egypt, because he was living his life on purpose. He was living his life for the greater good. And he wound up at Pharaoh's right hand, and even then, they saw God in this guy. It says that Pharaoh gave him an Egyptian name, Zarephath Paneah, means God speaks, he lives. Because God was all over Joseph. Because what Joseph understood was that his purpose was greater than his circumstances. That he was destined for more than his surroundings, than things that he was accumulating. Even while he was in the dungeon of Pharaoh, he lived his life with a purpose, with a greater purpose. See, this is how we push back on that bully that tells us that our significance is our stuff, that our significance is our resume, that our significance is our circumstances. It's how we push back on that idea that if we don't have all of those things, we must be insignificant. We push back on it by saying, I have a higher purpose. And the metric of measuring the value of my life is not measured by the things that I acquire or the things that I accomplish. It's measured by, am I true to my purpose? But how do we know? How do you define, how do you find that higher purpose? I think we all want to know what it is. I think we all kind of are searching for it. We spend most of our lives in this quest to say, why am I here? Well, as I look back over Joseph's life, over these 13 years of Joseph's life, there are a few things that I observe that I learned from him. That we can know what he knew, that we can know that God is with us. If we notice 5 things, I want to share 5 observations about our higher purpose. How do you discern your higher purpose? What has God put you here to do? The first thing you need to observe in discerning your higher purpose is that our higher purpose is clearly sourced in God. Our higher purpose is clearly sourced in God. You weren't put here by accident. You may think that it's just coincidental and random, that you were born to the parents you were born to, born in the age that you were born with the abilities and the capacities that you were born with. But it's not just coincidence. Like Einstein said, coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous. What it is it's God putting his hand on your life and saying, here are your opportunities. What are you going to do with them? Anthropologists and sociologists and psychologists break down human development, human character and personality development into 2 broad spheres. There are 2 things that kind of determine who we are and how we behave. Our nature and nurture. You've heard of that, those 2? Our nature is the suggestion that we are who we are because of our biology, because of the genetics, because of the divine alchemy of who our parents are and who genetically we have been designed to be. And our nature predetermines our abilities and our capacities and our limitations. But there's also another thing in play, and that's our nurture, our experience, our environment. Not just who we were born to be, but where we grew up and our life experiences, our successes and our failures. And I believe that God is present in both of those. Now you can choose to believe that it's just random, but I choose to believe that there is an intentionality, that each of us has been designed for a reason, and that when we look through the lens of what has God put me here to do, we begin to find our higher purpose. What is it that my nature and my experiences have taught me? What is it, the opportunities and the abilities, the liabilities that God has given me? And what are the experiences that have shaped me, that have equipped me? All of these things speak into us discerning our higher purpose. But I believe it begins by looking through the lens of God, that it clearly, God is the one who sourced our higher purpose. The second clue from Joseph's life is that our higher purpose is transferable, not circumstantial. The way I put it very easily is that Joseph was the same guy when he was a son or a slave. He was the same guy when he was a prince or when he was a prisoner. His character was the same. His behavior was the same. His gifts, his abilities, his talents were the same. He just applied them in different circumstances. Your higher purpose is transferable. And sometimes we get confused because we have good moments. Because we write a good paper or we cook a good meal or because we build a great birdhouse, we think that maybe my higher purpose is to be a writer or to be a chef or to be a carpenter. And all you did was just have one day where you got it right. It's transferable because it's transcendent. Look at the course of your life. What have you always been able to do? What has always been something that you stood out at? I remember one time when I was in graduate school, we had a flag football team. And I realized that's not a big deal, flag football. But you have to realize in the place where I went to seminary, there were a bunch of guys who played Division I college football. There were more than average. There were 8 or 10 in my class alone who played at like Florida State and Miami and Duke, and they played D1 college football. They were great athletes, and they played on my flag football team. I should say I played on their flag football team. But we played flag football together, and we were really, really good. And so during that season, I had some great games. There was a game when I had an interception return for a touchdown. I scored 3 or 4 other touchdowns, and I was the punter. Because they said, "Hey, Dave, we heard you played college soccer." And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Well, you can kick the ball, right?" So I became the punter for our flag football team, and I kicked the fire out of the ball. I mean, I just crushed it all day long. I was like kicking it, and I got in my head. Maybe God's calling me to be an NFL punter. I literally went out and bought 6 footballs, and for about a month, I would go out to this field near our house, and I would just kick footballs, thinking maybe I'm supposed to be an NFL punter. It's not circumstantial, it's not situational. Our higher calling is something that you are, regardless of the circumstances. You see, Joseph was the same when he was a son or a slave, when he was a prince or a prisoner. Our higher calling is transcendent, it's transferable. It is sourced in God, it is transferable, and thirdly, I think the third clue is that it's useful. It's useful to make others better. What do you do that makes the people around you better? What are you able to bring that when you are part of a community, when you are part of a family, when you're part of a group, that group is better because of that thing that you bring? Because of your insight, because of your humor, because of your wisdom, because of your talent, because of your mercy, because of your gentleness, because of your understanding, because of your empathy. What is it that you bring that makes those around you better? This was what Joseph did. Joseph was constantly improving the situation of the people around him, of his masters, of the jailers, of his cellmates, eventually of the entire nation of Egypt. I believe that our higher purpose has as a central key this idea that we have something to do that makes the lives of all the people around us better. And many times it's the one thing that only we can do. What is that thing that you do and you don't care who gets the credit? What is that one thing that you do and you don't care if anybody notices or if there's ever any applause, but you do it because you know that the people around will benefit from it? What is that thing that you do that people constantly are asking you to do more of, even though it's not in your job description or in your job title? What is that thing that people are thanking you, not just for doing for them, but for making a difference in their lives? These are the clues to finding our higher purpose. Think of Joseph's life. Joseph never, in the entire story of Joseph, there's only one time when he actually asks for something for himself. Only one time. And that was the time when he had told the prophecy, interpreted the dreams of the cupbearer and the baker. And when he told the cupbearer that he would be restored, he said, "Remember me, don't forget me." That was the only time he ever did anything that would benefit himself. Everything else was for the benefit of others, for the good of others, to make the lives of others better. That's why many scholars believe that the story of Joseph is a precursor to the story of Jesus. That what we see in Joseph's life is sort of the archetype of Jesus of Nazareth. Because if you look at the story of Jesus of Nazareth, he never did anything for himself. Every aspect of his life was for others. All of his teaching was for others. It was for us. All of his miracles was for the needs of others. He never did a miracle for himself. As far as we know, he didn't even eat the bread when he fed the 5,000. He healed others. The only time Jesus ever asked for anything for himself was when he was being crucified. And he said, "I am thirsty." And he asked for a drink. I think we discern our higher purpose when we consider, is it God-sourced? Is it transferable? Is it useful? And fourthly, is it unavoidable? Is it inevitable? Is it something you cannot not do? Is it something you cannot not do? Joseph was just being Joseph. That was who he was. He could not be Joseph. Who are you? What is that thing that you cannot not do? What is that creative spark in you? What is that motivation? What is that passion? What is that thing that when you're not doing it, you feel like your life is incomplete? This is a clue to what your higher purpose is. It's the thing that maybe is the most frustrating for you to do well because your standards of it, your intuition about it is so high. Because everybody else may say, well, that's good enough, but it's not good enough for you. It's because it's something you cannot not do. It's your passion, it's your motivation, it's your obsession. I think we discover what we are called to do when we eliminate the things that we aren't interested in doing, and we're left with the things that we can do, and perhaps the things that we cannot not do. Oftentimes people will come to me and they'll say, you know, I've been thinking about maybe God has a call on my life. I'm supposed to go into the ministry. And the first question I ask them is, can you not do it? Because if you can not do it, you should. Because the only reason you should get into this line of work is if you cannot not do it. It is the definition of our higher purpose. Our higher purpose is how we push back on the bully that says you're insignificant unless you acquire and accumulate. Our higher purpose is that thing that doesn't keep score. It is sourced in God. It is that thing that is transferable. It's not circumstantial. It's that thing that is that we cannot not do. It's unavoidable. It's Bill Gates being Bill Gates. It's Steve Jobs being Steve Jobs. It's LeBron being LeBron James. It's Joseph being Joseph. And finally, it's successful. Finally, somebody has to look at it and go, hey, you're good at that. I mean, if you think you are called to do something and nobody ever goes, hey, you're good at that, you're probably not called to do that. That's probably not your purpose. If you say, you know what? I believe God has made me to sing, and you're terrible. That's probably not your higher calling. It's probably not your higher calling if you say, you know what, I'm called to be a great chef, but you're terrible at cooking. That's probably not your higher calling. What was Joseph called to do? Joseph was called to take complex problems and to look at them strategically and to think them through carefully and to understand what no one else could understand. Joseph had this ability, and people saw it. People recognized it. What is it that people affirm in you? What is it that you do that people say, you're good at that. You're really great at that. What are the things that you do because you know that the outcome will be appreciated and valued by others? These are the clues. These are the clues that Joseph's life kind of gave us. While he was a slave and while he was a prisoner, he was living a purposeful life. I think in order for us to find our higher calling, our higher purpose, we need to know what Joseph knew. Joseph knew that God was with him. Joseph knew that God was working through him. He was operating on purpose. His abilities were God-sourced. He was doing what he could not do. He was successful and transferable and useful and unavoidable. All of these things came to inform, and our higher purpose isn't necessarily a thing. It may be a kind of thing. It may change over time to be specific things. But it's all rooted in the clues in how God has fashioned us, in what our passions are, in those things that make a difference in other people's lives. This is how Joseph lived. This is what he went through. He was living his life on purpose. When he was in the dungeon, in Pharaoh's dungeon, in Pharaoh's prison, he knew that God was with him. He knew that God would interpret the dreams that he had been given. And when he told the cupbearer and the baker that these things would happen, it was 2 years later. After he had been imprisoned for 13 years, the Pharaoh had these dreams. And so when the cupbearer remembered, oh yeah, there was this Hebrew slave who told us our dreams and everything he said came true, Pharaoh brought him in. And Pharaoh sat him down and he told him his dreams. He said, I had this dream about these 7 fat, healthy cows. And then these 7 ugly cows came along. And they were the ugliest cows I ever saw. And then the ugliest cows cannibalized the beautiful cows. But the ugly cows never got full. They never got bigger. And And then I woke up, and then I had another dream. And in that other dream, I dreamed that there was a stalk with 7 ears of grain, and they were full and verdant and lush. And then there was this stalk with these 7 skinny and dried out ears of grain, and they cannibalized the full ones. And I don't know what this means, and I've asked everyone. Joseph says, God will put your mind at ease. And he goes on and he explains to Pharaoh exactly what those dreams meant, that there would be 7 years of abundance and 7 years of famine. And then Joseph says, this is what you should do, Pharaoh. This is a man who came out of his dungeon who says, Pharaoh, this is what you should do. You should appoint people to watch over the crops for 7 years and store the abundance so that during the 7 years of famine, you can feed the people who are starving. You should do this. And Pharaoh says, that's a great idea. Why don't you do it? And his council approves, and they appoint Joseph to become second in command over all of Egypt. Joseph becomes the most powerful man in, at the time, one of the most powerful nations on earth, second only to Pharaoh. And it says at the end of this 13-year story that the whole world came to Joseph because he had been living his life on purpose. See, it's easy for us to give in to the bully, the phoniness bully, the bully that says, if only I had more money, if only I had a better job, if only I had a better life, well, then I would be content, and then my life would be full, and then I'd be significant. This is a bully that is rooted in our consumeristic culture. It's rooted in the idea that our significance and our value is attached to what we accomplish and what we acquire. It goes all the way back to 1899 to Dr. Thorstein Veblen and his pecuniary emulation that said that people who are in the working class will always seek to emulate the people who are in the leisure class. And in order to do that, they will become slaves of this conspicuous consumption. He said that in 1899. Here in 2017, I believe that we are bullied more than he ever imagined. But the way that we find freedom in that, the way that we find liberation from that bully that tells us our significance is found in our acquisitions and our accomplishments, is to say that we are destined for better things. We are destined for greater things. I am seeking my higher purpose. And the metrics of measuring that is not the trophies of my accomplishments, but the confidence that I have that I am fulfilling my purpose in life. This is what we celebrate on Father's Day. On Father's Day, we celebrate the idea that there is something more. There is something more than living a life looking out for ourselves, that there is this higher purpose. I know that's what Father's Day means to me. It's reminding me that devoting my life to something greater than myself is the most significant thing that I can do. So I want to punch that phoniness bully in the throat. I want to kick its ass. Happy Father's Day.